I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. One of the many things that I love about horror is its purity. Horror is a straight shot directly to our emotions, and it goes directly to our subconscious. Because sometimes, you know what? We need to feel first and think second. We need something that can get past that logical defense that our mind has, because sometimes, this big brain, it's part of the problem. And I think that horror works a lot like music does, where one chord from your favorite song can change your mood in a heartbeat. Both horror and music, they are primal, and they are both a safe release for emotions that we didn't even know we needed to release. Of course, music, like horror, is very subjective. What you like and what you don't like is intensely personal to each person. But even though it's subjective and it is very personal, music still has this amazing ability to bring us together. You find your tribe sometimes through the music. So today, I want to talk about scary music. And it's not just horror music, it's music that scares the other people in the culture, scared us as kids, music that reminds us of horror movies, things like that. The connection that we have with music, the connection that we have with horror, and what happens when those two things come together. And sometimes that even helps outsiders feel heard. And my guests today are some fun outsiders, the hosts of the popular podcast, Discover the Horror, Aaron Aubuchon, Damien Glonick, and John Kitley. Now, John, he runs the Kitley's Crypt Horror website, and he's a writer for Horror Hound magazine. Damien Glonick is the co-creator of the Living Dead dolls, and Aaron Aubuchon teaches horror at Webster University, and he writes about horror in various publications, as well as looking like Robert Goulet. Their goal is to give you reasons to explore horror in ways that you've never seen and give you new ways to see horror that you've loved for years. And they're here to talk about their own personal connections to music, horror, and where the two connect. John, Damien, and Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Sorry, but I'm never going to get Robert Goulet out of my head right now.
Thank you.
So folks, I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I do listen to it, and I love getting sucked into it. I find myself getting sucked into the conversation every time. What I really love about it is how it feels so natural and organic, and you guys are just having fun. And I mean, it becomes a problem sometimes because I'm out in my yard wearing headphones and I'm just like, fuck that. Yeah, no, you can't say that. It's that kind of thing happens, and it's like Tourette's. But I thought it would be fun to have you guys on because you're really opinionated, you're really knowledgeable, and it's a really broad topic, talking about horror and music, because there's a lot of what we have, same interests. We love horror, we love certain types of music, but it's also pretty varied. We don't like everything that everybody likes, but there are these moments where the circles kind of overlap. And in that, I think it happens a lot with music that's a little bit, say, out of the mainstream for people who love horror. So I have my traditional question that I ask, and it's, what's your first kiss with horror? What was the thing that took you down this terrible path of destruction? But also, what was the first song that you heard that freaked you out a little, even if it was unintentionally scary to you? So, John, how about we start with you?
As far as a movie, probably Jaws is what scared me the most, but I think I was already into monster movies before that. As far as music, I don't remember being scared by the music. I mean, being a horror fan, you're kind of an outcast or an outsider anyway, and listening to hard rock or heavy metal is kind of the same thing. It's not public, it's not for normal public consumption, so you tend to fall into that too. Plus, when you're a horror fan, a lot of the darker themes that bands like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden were covering immediately would draw you in anyway. So, I mean, that's what I got hooked on right from the beginning.
So mine is actually Black Sabbath, the original Black Sabbath album, which is why I have this backdrop. For me, that scared me more than anything, the cover, before I even got to hear the music. But my uncle, indoctrinated me. So he was only like 10 years older than me. And at one point, I had to live up in the attic because my parents was going through a nasty divorce. And so I was with him and all his older friends. And they're like, oh, he's a scaredy cat. He's afraid of everything. He's like, you want to listen to this? And he pulls this album out. I'm scared shitless just by looking at the witch that's on the cover of the original Black Sabbath. So the first song that really gets me is that trichord. You know, I started at this really high level of that, but there were also pop songs that scared me. I was a scaredy cat. How about you, Aaron? Did you have anything that freaked you out when you were a kid?
You know, I like the structure of this question, but I'm going to move it sideways a little bit because for me, I've been kissed a lot with horror. And so I have a series of breadcrumbs, more than one big mega experience. But one that I point to is the first time that I remember seeing Frankenstein at age 5. But the other big one was when I saw The Return of the Living Dead at age 13. And what I found was that The Return of the Living Dead, I taped it. The first night that I ever saw it, I also taped it off of cable. And I found myself watching it literally every day. And that was at a time when I could watch movies repeatedly, but every day was a little bit much and it never got old. But I realized that the reason I was watching it so much was the music. And it was that movie that turned me on to punk rock and the Cramps and a lot of the stuff that would end up becoming the defining music of my life. And so for me, it wasn't that it was a music that scared me. It was that I finally found some music that felt like I felt on the inside. And I found music that was sort of related to the genre that I'd been in love with since I was literally as far back as I could remember. And I found that in punk rock and eventually in some of the more sort of weirder metal and certainly in some of the alternative music that I listened to, I was always searching for that kind of dark dissonance in the music. So it wasn't exactly that it scared me. I don't know that scary was never a big chunk of it, but feeling sort of gravitating or like I was gravitating towards it. That was the important thing for me because it was dark and I like dark things even as a kid.
Yeah, I felt a connection to the dark as well, but I was really scared. And I think maybe it was because of my upbringing that I was in this weird fundamentalist cult, but like music was considered really something that was a way to get the devil into you. And I remember when The Exorcist came out and that song, Tubular Bells, would be on the radio. I would get freaked out. I would hear it and I would think about all the scary stuff that was in it as if the movie or the music itself held some kind of connection to the movie. And it was so bad that I remember at the same time, Paul McCartney and Wings had a song called Band on the Run. And there was this little this weird sound that went through that song. And it's supposed to be a nice, soothing song, but it reminded me of Tubular Bells just enough that I'd start getting really nervous as a kid. So I'm probably the only one who was that weirdly affected by music. But how about you, Damien? What was your first kiss and stuff?
So horror or movies and music are the two biggest things in my life. I'm in love with both of them immensely. And I think in 1977 was a huge turning point for me because I discovered both at the age of 5, like Aaron. My first horror movie I saw was The Car in the theater. And at that same age, I discovered Kiss. Mm-hmm. And I can pinpoint like that exact moment in my life when everything changed. I saw, it was like, early in the morning, I saw a commercial for the Kiss transistor radio. And I didn't know what I was watching. I was like, who are these people? Like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And like this makeup and these like high spiked shoes and outfits. I was just mesmerized by it. So I, eventually found out like they were a band and got, I think my first album was Love Gun. Mm-hmm. And that was it. Like Kiss was my life after that. I was so obsessed with them. And I think that eventually progressed into like, heavy metal, got into Black Sabbath, AC/DC. And then it was always trying to find like a lot like horror, especially when you get into the gore films, like trying to find the next shocking thing. So it was always like, like Motley Crue, what's heavier than Motley Crue? Like, Wasp, Motorhead. And I think nothing really scared me. I was always attracted to it, but I would think the one thing that was another game changer in my life for music, where I felt music was actually dangerous and exciting, was when I first heard Venom, black metal.
Yeah.
And that changed everything, because now it exposed me to, like in horror too, I got into the underground, and that's where I found my true love for everything.
Yeah, that album was the one that I thought actually may have had a little bit of evil in it. Like they may have dropped a little bit into the vinyl.
Like nobody was promoting Satan the way Venom was back then.
And how it sounded. The very idea that it was such a muddy, like really nasty
very raw.
sound. Yeah. It just sounded like, oh, fuck, these guys, this is not an act. They're actually out there, in a shed somewhere making this music. But yeah, it's so funny that you bring up Kiss, because, and John's, we're about the same age. So we were there at that transitional period where music was rock and roll and Elvis was still kind of around doing his live in Hawaii shows and things. And then there was Alice Cooper. And there were these live horror shows that they used to do, which were kind of set around the Alice Cooper experience. And then there was Kiss. And so there was like overnight this strange theatrics that existed beforehand with a whole bunch of different groups and Screaming Jay Hawkins and stuff. But this was like a new jump off that felt really, I mean, when Kiss first came out and Alice Cooper came out, it wasn't just that it was like scary. It was like grimy. It was like everything that my dad hated all in one thing. He was like listening to Marty Robbins. And then, I'd go to school and people would be like, did you hear that Gene Simmons and Alice Cooper had a gross out contest at their last thing, that they're puking in each other's mouths, and you're like going, oh my God. You're like, the whole thing was this idea of how nauseating the experience was to be in that. And I love that, but it was also something that scared me. I was like, man, maybe things are going off the rails. And I don't know.
Did that ever happen?
Oh, no.
There were so many of those rumors.
In my school, it was
things.
Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Ozzy Osbourne snorted ants, and
he did bite off the head of a dove at a press conference.
Yep,
that was on purpose.
I love the photos of that too, where he's just like smiling. He's drunk out of his mind. He's got some feathers in his mouth, and he's got a girl on his lap who she's trying to get away. It's like a cat going into a water. She's like trying to get out of the way of this fucking guy who's gone insane. But
I think the funny thing is, and I mean, I was a huge Kiss fan back in the 70s as well, but their music is not satanic. I mean, it's rock and roll.
Yeah.
Alice Cooper, on the other hand, he was singing about sick things and
cold
dead babies and cold Ethel.
Cold Ethel, that's what I meant. Cold gin.
And the fact that Alice Cooper was on the Muppet Show trying to get Gonzo to sell his soul to the devil on a kid's show was just, I think that showed what Alice Cooper was, that he was this evil villain, but he was okay. And it was hilarious. And I remember watching that on the Muppet Show going, you got to be kidding me. Well, but his stuff, I think, really had the first band, or the first group, I guess, that really had horror elements in their music.
Yeah. See, I used to listen to Love It to Death. It was the first in my house. All of this was verboten. So I would listen with the old headphone things where it's just the one jack in your ear off of an old cassette player. And so we had Love It to Death. And that scared me so bad. I was holding on to like my sheet, because the beginning of that album is really freaky, and it gets a Ballad of Dwight Fry's on there. So he's like screaming, let me get out of here and all that. And then it ends with Sunrise. I was like, oh, I feel so much better now. Sunrise is the sun coming up. So he was really talented, but he knew that he was playing that dark side. And it was something that happened in the 70s where you would have things like Kiss and you'd have Alice Cooper, and the parents would go insane, but then there'd be something that they would do to try and homogenize themselves, at least make them not so dangerous, like the Muppet Show and the Paul Lynde Halloween special where they had, Kiss on there. And so you're like sitting there going, oh, here's Gene Simmons still looking intimidating and stuff, but he's part of a joke, and that he's okay with being part of that joke, I thought was good. That kind of brings me into like this whole thing that we're talking about, where you had, Aaron, a story about Ozzy, and it's a little bit different everywhere, that there were these things for kids, especially boys, that the dark side of things is what we grew up with. And we we're all pre-internet, kind of urban legends in music. What song did you know about that had an urban legend that you remember thinking was true that kind of made it creepy? So it's like Roller Coaster of Love is the one that most people know of, where allegedly the scream that's in the song is that there was an actual crash on a roller coaster and the person's scream is a dead person. So there's like these songs that have these things. Do you have any urban legends like that you used to hear about from songs?
I think the only one I could think of would be Don't Fear the Reaper.
Mm.
But
suicide.
Yeah, even though they emphatically deny that's what it's about. I don't know. I mean, the songs that I grew up with, even at a young age, were more like the old rock and roll, the Louie Louie and stuff like that, were more controversial, but not, I don't know. I don't know anything about as far as evil.
I was really fascinated with the occult when I was a kid, like a little kid, whenever there wasn't really, I didn't have access to anything, but I was fascinated by it. And so I don't know, I guess I was probably, if you think the Satanic Panic hit around 85, I was 12, 13 years old. And so like all that stuff that they decided almost retroactively was satanic, like Ozzy again. And as a guy who loves like the first 3 Ozzy Osbourne solo albums, Mr. Crowley's on there and that's it. There's really nothing that's particularly satanic or dark in any way, but all that shit that they pretended was in there, I believed for a while. If you listen to it buried in there somewhere, there's some kind of thing that's going to make you able to open a pathway to hell or whatever the thing was. Or if you play it backwards, you'll turn into a demon, or, like all the nonsense things that they would say on 2020, to try to scare children. I thought that all was pretty great for about a year at one point.
Yeah. Well, I remember Black Sabbath. Everybody was talking about Black Sabbath, but really, if you listen to the songs and you read the lyrics, so much of it is socio-political, like War Pigs and stuff like that. It's not necessarily, although the song Black Sabbath is definitely trying to go down the horror path. I was thinking more of like urban legend, like the song Timothy, where people made this a big hit. But Timothy is a song about guys that are trapped in a mine and they eat Timothy. And that was like a top 40 song. And so there were songs like that, or Angie Baby by Helen Reddy, which the whole thing about that, the urban legend of that is that this actually happened. She was a insane girl that was kept in her house, and some kid wanted to play with her and pretended that he was the DJ in the radio, and she ended up killing him in the house. And so they wrote this whole song about it. I wasn't sure if you guys collected that kind of thing or not, but it was something that I always thought was really interesting, where rock and roll always had this thing of like, well, there's also this really creepy story behind it.
I don't think I've ever really heard about urban legends in particular songs before. This is kind of all new to me. Now I have to go look.
Yeah. Well, I was a big fan of those, and I was a big fan of murder ballads, songs like Mac the Knife, which is based on a real guy, or Stagger Lee, which has been done like 200 times, but it actually started, I think, in St. Louis. I think the original Stagger Lee was in St. Louis. And so I love that there are these stories, like some of the oldest songs that are out there, minstrel songs and stuff like that, were all about, the guy who ate his family, or the person who murdered someone, and then they found the bones later. Do you think, what do you, I was
going to say, it's weird how they get mainstream too. Like a gig I did a while back in my professional, wearing my sort of professional hat as a person who makes media. There was a guy that was trying to pitch the notion of a podcast tour of downtown St. Louis. And so you would stop at different places and you'd hook up your iPhone or whatever to the podcast. And whenever you got to the right location, you'd listen to it. And so the thing that I wrote a script for and was ultimately produced in full sort of radio drama form was the story of Stagger Lee. And it's interesting how those things not only be like they're from, that isn't an urban legend. There's truth to that real story. Yeah. But eventually they become mainstream. They become sort of tales that you tell children to keep them on the straight and narrow. And then ultimately at some point they become a thing that, a local tourism board uses to try to like, hey, come to our town. It's cool. We murder people here.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny, especially Stagger Lee is cool because it starts where they don't like Stagger Lee, but as the decades go by, he becomes a folk hero in the song. So it's really interesting.
Was Sammy Davis Jr. then really singing about Candyman, the urban legend?
Wouldn't that be awesome if he was?
Once I was I went to France once, and the only two American songs that they played on the radio were Wham's "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go" and Sammy Davis Jr.'s "The Candyman."
What year was this?
1984.
Wow.
All makes sense now.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Scott, going back to the Sabbath, back in the satanic panic days. I mean, I was full into defending metal.
Yeah,
and
same here.
And a very, very opposed to the idiots that were coming up, like you mentioned, all the bullshit that wasn't there. But like you said, or even the beginning of the Sabbath albums, there's a lot of pro-Christianity or pro-God lyrics in there that they apparently didn't pick up on. All they want to do is the Black Sabbath or even War Pigs, which again, like you said, is not satanic. It's anti-war. Mm-hmm. So it always amazed me that them and other bands were getting, burnt at the stake before they even had a chance to defend themselves, when half the shit they were saying wasn't what they thought they were saying.
Well, it's really interesting because there's so much of that. You can see it back in the jazz era as well. I mean, they did that in the jazz era. Whenever there is some kind of change in the music of the culture, when it tends to slide in a different way, and rock and roll was the same thing. I mean, and rock and roll had like some of their early guys are like marrying their 14-year-old cousin. So there was already some pretty sordid shit that was going on behind that music. But the Beatles back masking and stuff, that goes all the way back to the White Album, and even earlier than that, The Rain. I think the first song that they had any back masking on was A Mistake. And it became this whole thing that kind of went along with the drug culture, as well as the occult was starting to get big in the rock and roll world. And I think that just kind of glommed on. And by the 80s, it really hit ahead. But John, you're talking about that, about the Satanic Panic. That was one of the things when I was a preteen. I was in a church where they brought the list of all these songs and why these songs are bad. They even had like the Pina Colada song on there. And they were like, if you play it backwards, they say something about smoking marijuana. And I'm like, even the Pina Colada song.
That song's about adultery. So who gives a shit if they're talking about smoking pot? The song is blatantly about screwing around.
Right. That list, though, became kind of like a shortcut Bible for me, just as it did for horror movies that told me I wasn't supposed to watch. So like they introduced me to Electric Funeral. I'm like, I got to listen to this song, Electric Funeral, because they were so upset by the idea. I remember being in church and they said the name Electric Funeral and just this gasp. Oh, like they said fuck or something in church. I was like, you guys blow my mind. And I was stuck in that shit.
That's my favorite Sabbath song, Electric Funeral.
Awesome.
Bill Hicks had a funny bit about that where he said, if you're sitting around playing your albums backwards, you are Satan.
Yeah, right. So, John, you mentioned Satanic Panic by name, and we went through it. And I remember an incident that happened where I was going to a Judas Priest concert in, I think it must have been 84. And they were already picketing outside of the Brennan Byrne Arena in the Meadowlands. And I remember that they had this group of people that were just standing there with bullhorns, and they were throwing those chick tracks at people. And it's really got super uncomfortable because some of my friends are really Christian, but they were going to see this and they could not get over the fact that they were getting yelled at. Did you have anything like, what was the creepiest thing that you had to deal with during that time?
All the concerts that I went to back in the 80s, not once did we see protesters.
No.
And I think if they would have been in trouble, because back then in the 80s, the heavy metal fans wouldn't put up with any of that bullshit. So anybody of those guys that were picketing, they would either run them off the street or bad things would have happened.
Well, that was the thing. They had police there, right? So they were there as if it was allowed to be there. So it was like these things of people biting their tongues. I mean, people at Giant Stadium and stuff, they used to come with battle axes. You couldn't take it in with you, but you'd be in the parking lot and there'd be a guy with a battle axe, another guy with a sword and shit like that.
That's only for Man of War concerts.
Yes. Well, we're going to get to Man of War because there's
Do we have to?
Oh, I'm oiling myself over here in preparation.
Yeah, I'll bet. Oh man, when I saw them in concert, it was just fucking amazing. So we're talking about this satanic panic thing and everything. And there's all this horror-based stuff or murder-based stuff that had become really popular. And it always blows my mind that there's like this line of demarcation. I've never been able to see what a line in the sand is, where something is popular and it's allowable and something that's not popular. So maybe you guys have seen some trends that you think are interesting. One of the things that I'm fascinated by is dead teenager songs from the 50s, like Leader of the Pack or Last Kiss, where she drowns in the water. So is there anything like that you're fascinated by, like a really dark side of pop rock?
Yeah, I am. I have a big fascination for 50s, 60s novelty monster songs, because I think that the subjects that they're dealing with are actually really serious. And I've always been fascinated by that kind of judo move that the Monster Kid movement did as a sort of cultural thing to take what are very serious subjects, death, deformity, existential angst, all that stuff, and turn it into kind of fun kids stuff. And so I just love all that crap. There's a couple of albums out that are out on, I think it's Buffalo Hop Records, but one of them's called Horror Hop and the other one's called Monster Bop. And they're two just outstanding collections of that kind of stuff. And it's all these, R&B and rock and roll singers from that era who just jumped on a bandwagon and cut a 45 and they just compile all these things together. But I love that stuff. It's just such an interesting thing to see monsters enter teeny pop rock and roll music.
Yeah.
That's like the Misfits taking everything one step further, where the Misfits are like that 50s rock and roll sound, but with these uber violent lyrics that are he's singing so pleasantly, with the whoa whoa whoa, and the lyrics are just extremely violent, raping your mother and killing babies and stuff like that, but he says it in such a pleasant way. It's like you almost gloss over what he's actually saying.
Yeah.
That Glenn is a nice boy.
Yeah. I ain't no goddamn son of a bitch.
Man, one time when I was like 14 years old, I dug out my mom's old record player. They planted me at my grandma's when my parents went on vacation, and I'm sitting in my grandma's bedroom with my mom's old record player listening to Legacy of Brutality, and that song came on, and my grandma came back, and to her credit, this is one of the reasons I think I always had a refuge with my grandma, and that's one of the reasons I still think that I turned out okay, because she comes back and she was like, well, this song's pleasant. And I was like, it's about a movie, I think. And she was like, okay. And then took off, and like,
I remember that moment, Clint Eastwood and Where Eagles Dare. So it's funny that you bring up the Misfits. It's one of those bands, like being more of a metalhead at a certain point. I kind of went to metalhead to punk at a certain level, but I was okay with the Misfits, but I didn't really want to get involved with the Cramps because I felt that the Cramps were more punky and weird in some way. And now I look at it and I go, wow, I really, I missed out. I came to them a little bit later. And I think that they kind of epitomized what I was looking for, maybe a little bit more than the Misfits, in that love for horror movies. Like there's a darkness, and I'm not quite sure all the time what Glenn Danzig's going for, but almost always I know where Lux is trying to go with the Cramps. It's right in there. But without it having to be about scary movie or music itself, just the idea that we like this darker, non-traditional, outside of the mainstream music. What was the first song or the group that when you heard it, you went from feeling like nobody understood you to I've just been heard, I've just been seen, that song talks to me? So John, do you have that?
Probably Iron Maiden, because that was the first band that I really went nuts into. And their songs had stories to them, and not necessarily, I mean, Number of the Beast technically is the same as a horror movie. It's not pro Satan one way or the other. I mean, it tells you that it's bad or what the guy's going through. But I mean, they did a song on Peace of Mind called Still Life, which is about a guy that's going crazy because he's looking into this pond, thinking that he's talking to someone in the pond, and he's telling it to his friend. And by the end of the song, he's saying, they don't want me, they want me and you to jump into the pond to drown. I mean, it's just this fucking creepy ass story. And I think that's one of the things that I just fell in love with Maiden, because the way they talked about war, and unlike bands like Manowar, and nothing against them, but they were always, the courage and the power and the glory, where you listen to the Trooper and you're like, hey, war kind of sucks. This isn't, bravery and everything. This guy's dying alone in the cold. So I think that was the band that I really, really fell in love with because of the stories, and then obviously because of the music as well.
How about you, Damien?
That's a tough one. I mean, to me, Black Sabbath is one of probably the greatest two bands of all time.
Yeah.
They just epitomize like the sound of fear, more or less. I mean, the opening track, as soon as that needle drops on the opening track of Black Sabbath, I mean, that is the sound of fear, and it was so encompassing. And then when they get into songs like The Wizard and stuff like that, they're telling stories, and every song sounds like a horror movie in a sense that they're really creating a sound unlike anything I ever heard before. And that was the epitome of just what I guess I was looking for with everything. And then going back to Venom, where it took to me everything one step further, because Black Sabbath was a gateway for what I was looking for. Venom opened the door to and exposed me to so much like that. Like Venom was my exposure to punk rock as well. I would never probably would have got into punk if I wasn't into Venom first.
How about you, Aaron?
It's I feel like it's almost like repeating. Like Damien said, I think Black Sabbath is one of those super seminal bands, not just for what we're talking about, but for me personally. And like he said, also, there was a time where music, it was difficult to say which was more important, music or film. I wanted to be a musician just as much as I ever wanted to do anything with movies at one point. So I would say the Misfits were a band for me that was huge, but even more than that was Sam Hain, because Sam Hain was a band that took it seriously.
Yeah.
And for me, that was really, really important. All this other stuff felt cartoonish to me, Possessed and a lot of bands that I listened to that were like, quote unquote, evil. There was a bit of cartoonishness, and I liked that cartoonishness, but there was something about Sam Hain that felt dangerous and real. Like you were listening to the ritual that was going to summon the demon, not just listening to somebody talk about it. You were hearing it. And, to continue to talk about Danzig for a second, in his in the little video that they released of a bunch of music videos that Danzig put out, in between, they would put out these little sort of interstitial moments with Danzig himself. And in one of them, he's sitting there with his guitar and he just kind of bangs out a big open E power chord. And he's talking about how that chord sounds and how it makes him feel evil. And I think that's really important too, right? Like it's not even so much the lyrical content, it's the way the music hits you and how it sounds. So for me, the other thing that really resonated was when I found a lot of the industrial music that I found. So Ministry and Skinny Puppy. I still say, even though Skinny Puppy is mostly not about anything horror related, I've heard very, very little in my life that sounds more like a horror movie makes me feel when it's good than Skinny Puppy did on their first 6 or 7 out, right up to the Process, especially Two Dark Park and Last Rites. Those albums are just pure body horror, chaos, insanity. And so those guys really resonated with me as well.
I have to agree with Aaron. I mean, Samhain is probably easily one of my top 5 all-time favorite bands. And because of that, it's like I love the Misfits. I was a crazy Misfits fan, but Samhain is like if the Misfits were Sesame Street, Samhain was a Electric Company.
That's strange.
I don't think that has ever been said before. That comparison ever.
I'd like to see what Danzig would say if he heard that. He'd be like,
but it is. It's like it grew up and it took everything seriously, and the sound is extremely haunting, more so than I think any other band ever was. And I don't know how to classify them. Are they punk? Are they rock? Are they metal? Like they're nothing. They're their own thing. It's like they were just going for a sound of haunt. If haunting had a sound, that's Samhain.
Well, that's like Twist of Cain for me off of the first Danzig album. There's just something about that song that just feels like there's somebody just got murdered in the other room. And they're just like sitting there wiping the blood off of themselves singing this song. It just has this really nasty sound to it. And it's funny, as much as I joke about Danzig, there's something really influential and interesting about him that really affects me. I went to see him for, I think it was Death Red Sabbath. Must have been a decade at least ago. And it was a pretty good album. But I went there and I'm like, yeah. I mean, there's like 2 good songs, right? There's like 2 good songs, I guess. So I went to see it for the sake of just seeing Danzig and everything. And we're making fun out of him in the audience, right? Oh, look, there's signs, no cameras or the show will end. Gee, thanks, Glenn. All this stuff. And he's late. And as soon as he came out, I don't know what song he even started with. It was like, we're making fun. The whole set is like a cemetery. There's fog machines just going for an hour while you're waiting for him to finish his Zagnut or whatever the fuck he's doing in the back. And all of a sudden he pops out and it was like everybody's chest just went forward like, yeah. And it was like this exorcism that happened. And all of the stuff, it was not me there at 40. It was me at 19. Me at 21 when I first saw him. That was what came out for that show. And there were several bands that I've had that kind of feeling happen when I'm dealing with it. The song that I felt like I first really fit in was Beyond the Realms of Death, Judas Priest, because I was really in a dark, dark fucking place when I was a teenager. And I heard this song sound like suicide, but then saying, fuck all of you. And there was something really strong and empowering about that. Instead of it being, oh, now I may as well kill myself because they made a song. It was like, no, I won't. And fuck you. And I'm not alone in any of this. And I felt that was something that metal gave me a lot. Where I felt weak, it gave me strength. Where I felt alone, I felt connection. I think Priest did that a lot for me because they had a lot of songs, Take on the World and United. And they're not the best of their songs, but they really hit on this anthemic thing of wanting to belong to a tribe that really hit. It's the same thing with Man of War, which is the thing that as they're my guiltiest of guilty pleasures, Man of War. I remember I introduced my friends to it with Into Glory Ride. They were in the import section of my Sam Goody, and they're from Jersey, right? They were in the import because they had only, I think, Metal Blade Records and Roadrunner Records and stuff like that were the only people who were putting out those albums. And when I heard that Gloves of Metal was the first song that really hit me with Manowar, they're so absurd, and yet they really hit a part of me that really loves it. When I was getting tattooed the first time, I'm sitting there and the guy goes, "Can I put on some music?" And at that point, it was like sometime in the 90s. And Man of War, he puts on Man of War, and he just looks at me almost conspiratorially. He goes, "I really love Man of War." And I go, "Me too." I hadn't listened for the longest time. And it was like this whole thing of kind of how I felt watching Danzig. There are moments where it means more than just, and it happens with movies too. It's not just me watching it now. There's a connection to another part of me that really needed saving at that time. And that was kind of the weird salvation. So I'm not sure if any of that resonates with you guys, but music really had this thing of kind of saving my ass.
Yeah, for sure. That's what music does. Yeah,
it's definitely an escape, or not necessarily escape, but I mean, like any music, it has an emotional impact. And if you're having a shitty day, cranking some tunes and something heavy, I mean, that's perfect way to put you in a better mood.
And I would say too, this darkness that we're talking about that kind of is the overarching subject, that has been the way that I have made an entry point into a lot of different kinds of music that don't seem like, or a lot of different genres of music, maybe don't seem like they have that. Like my dad had a lot of blues albums laying around when I was in high school. And then I heard about Robert Johnson and Selling Your Soul to the Devil. And I was like, okay, well, if that music is where you go to sell your soul to the devil, I've got to hear some of it. And I've still, one of my favorite blues songs of all times is this song by Lightnin' Hopkins called Going Back Home. And it's a pretty simple song about how he's trying to get back home, but it's so haunting and it sounds so haunted that it makes you think that he's singing about death, the way that he sings it. And so I find, like, I love old country music, like from the 50s and 60s. And that's mostly because I heard Marty Robbins doing El Paso, which is this song about death that's really haunted, and it's kind of like a horror Western in some ways. And so I find that dark thing, that sense that you were talking about, Scott, where you feel like you're connected to the music and it's saving you somehow, but also there's a power piece to it where you feel like you're engaged. I feel like I'm engaging in something that's looking over the precipice into the darkness and smiling.
I'm trying to think of the song. I'm forgetting it now. Delia's Gone is an old Johnny Cash. Yeah, where he shoots his girl. And then he's being haunted by her in his prison cell when he's getting ready to be taken to the gallows. And Ghost Riders in the Sky, it's not just murder. There's also this strangely supernatural thing. And I think that really it resonates when you think that these songs, country songs, are being sung while people are going across the country when there is no country, right? They're basically finding their way across to the Pacific Ocean and stopping wherever it is. And these songs are going to have that kind of creepiness from the experiences that they're having. And, they're all pretty religious too. So seeing Ghost Riders in the Sky must have been like some kind of really intriguing thing. But you hit, one of the things that I also loved to do was I used to get sound effects records for Halloween. Yep. And just listen to, how fucking weird is that? But I used to listen to sound effects records going, oh man, someday I'm going to use this. But they would kind of theme them. And it hits me that there were these entire, like you mentioned, the Monster Kids. There was this whole moment when that kind of thing was being patronized. They were, hey, we could make some money off of this. So let's have Boris Karloff doing readings and albums, and you would have movie stars that were horror guys singing other songs to do that. I think that's a really intriguing thing about music itself, how it has a strange connection. What's the weird song? Like you had mentioned that there are certain things like country music where you don't intentionally think that it's going to be weird or evil or dark, but it came out of nowhere and got you. For me, it was the Cure Subway song. The Cure, I'm thinking, but the Cure had a couple songs that were like heads on tables and stuff. But Subway song scared the shit out of me the first time I heard that. It's just like a minute and a half, and it ends with this woman being attacked, and it's just the sound of the guitars and everything, the feedback. Is there anything like that you saw where you're like, man, that's a song that's really horrific, but nobody really thinks of that band in that way?
Murder Ballads album from Nick Cave.
Oh wow.
Every song on that is a haunting story.
O'Malley's Bar, man.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Or Where the Wild Roses Grow. One song though, which is I think actually this band, I'm a big fan of the band Garbage. And when you really listen to their lyrics, all their lyrics are very maniacal in a sense. And this one song, Number One Crush, that was actually in a Romeo and Juliet film. I think it was a single for that. But when you listen to the lyrics, she's, she says like, I would die for you, I would kill for you. And it's so obsessive sounding. It just reminds me of like Dr. Frankenstein, who is so obsessed with his work that he would do anything. And the outside world he's stuck in his tunnel, that's all he sees. He's so obsessed.
That's cool. That's like Elvis Costello has on an album called Blood and Chocolate. It's a song called I Want You. And it starts with this really sweet, almost like a lullaby. And then it turns into this dark, obsessive thing of we're going to kill each other. I am making you sick. I am going to kill you. And you're like, holy shit. By the end of the song, you're like, this is the creepiest thing. And he's just kind of whispering. The music ends and he's just like, I want you. And you're like, fuck, what was in your breakfast, man? That's not peace, love, and understanding.
I'd even go back to Alice Cooper on From the Inside. There's a song called Millie and Billie, which is a love song, and it's a duet with him and another woman, like a love song, except they've escaped from an asylum and they're criminally insane, and they've killed her husband, and he's cut up in pieces in the trunk of their car. But it's sung like this pleasant love song, and then they're like in the middle of the song, Millie is singing about she dreams of their children. They're twisted and gruesome inside, and you're going, wait a minute, what the fuck was that about? And then they start talking about that they killed her late husband Donald, who's tied up in baggies in the back in the trunk, and it's just this juxtaposition of this love song, and when you start listening to the lyrics, wait a minute, these people are nuts. They're killers.
What was the one? I think I can't remember if it's Marshall Mathers or if it's Eminem himself, with a Stan.
Yeah, Stan.
Yeah, that's incredibly disturbing.
Yeah, obsessed fan.
Yeah, his best fan. And he's just like, in the end, he's recording all of these messages to whichever it is, Eminem or Mathers. And you hear him killing. He's got like people, his girlfriend and stuff in the car, and he's going to kill them. And so he just, he is doing all this because he doesn't believe that his hero is listening to his pleas as a fan.
I think the one that I love the nature of this question because it points to something that I like to talk about in horror in general, which is I think horror is less effective if it's wall to wall sometimes. And so horror that starts with a bright, shiny face that looks like it's going to be comedy is often scarier than horror that's balls out sort of horror constantly. So I like your question. And my answer to the question is, if I say the Violent Femmes.
Yes, I know exactly what song you're talking about.
Right. And people think of the songs that they know, but it's not that one. It's
Country Death Song, right?
Country Death Song, which is an evil, evil song about killing your daughter and then hanging yourself so you can go to hell.
Yeah. Yeah. That song, I mean, when he says, make a wish and be sure not to tell, all good children go to heaven, count to 7. And there's just the sound of like a banjo in the background, and just the pads of the drum. Yeah. That's one of those songs that when I heard it, I was like going, well, this is not the band I thought this was.
Right. And that makes it so much more effective. You're like, oh, those quirky kids with their funny music. And then you're like, Jesus Christ, where did this come from?
Yeah. What other songs can you think of that are like that? One of the songs that most, like when we talk about evil, one of the things I was going to ask is, we talked about Venom a little bit. Was there ever a song or something that you heard that you went, well, you know what? If there is evil that's actually been personified in a song, this is one of them.
Well, for me, it would be anything that's by like a band like Screwdriver, like, the Nazi skinhead music. Right. For me, that would be the personification of evil.
Yeah, I really like the early Marilyn Manson stuff off the first 2 albums. There was definitely some, especially like his rendition of Sweet Dreams.
Oh, wow.
That's a perfect example. Or even when he did I Put a Spell on You, he completely changed. Well, not that he changed the meaning of those songs, but their meaning came across so much clearer.
Right. Yeah.
When you heard him sing it in different tones of possessed voices.
Well, especially Put a Spell on You, because that originally was done It was supposed to be a nice little blues song, but they all got drunk when they were making that song. So that madness that you're hearing is they're hammered out of their minds, and screaming is just screaming. And so for him to take that and feel that weirdness that's inside that, I love interpretations like that, where it's not necessarily that the song is meant to be that way, but the energy behind it, like Louie Louie. It's a calypso song, right? But because they're hammered as well, and it sounds so vulgar, that it becomes a song that's banned. And Rumble, which is an instrumental, is the first song, I think it's the only song that's ever been banned that had no lyrics, because it had this sound that was like a riot. And so they're like, no, we can't have this song. So I love that you mentioned Manson doing that. One of the songs that really freaked me out, and it's barely a song, it's more like a spoken word thing. It's by the Golden Palominos, and it's called Victim. And it starts with like the sound of a police radio in the background. Like you can barely hear it, but you hear that little squelchy sound that there is when someone's saying over. And it's a woman speaking out the lyrics, and she's been kidnapped, and she's in the trunk of a car, and she's trying to get out, and she's just talking matter-of-factly, like, this is probably going to be the last thing that I ever do. And she's like, I can just feel myself being like someone who's hearing about my story. Like, oh my God, I was late to the library and I got home and I found out that she was missing. And are you okay? And I'm calling my mom and saying I'm okay and I love her. And she's in the back of the trunk. And at the end, he opens up the trunk and she goes, I look up and there's a shotgun in my face. The last thing I hear is a click. That's the end of the song.
Nice.
And it's like, holy shit. And that's one of those things that it's evil because it's so banal, right? It's just the banality of evil. Any other songs like that you can think of?
Merciful Fate's Nuns Have No Fun.
Yes. Oh man, that was one of those. This actually goes into another thing of the song or the record that you had to hide, like the one that if you mentioned it, it came with an apology. You had to like explain yourself to certain friends or family members if they found what the fuck is Nuns Have No Fun. And that 45, holy shit. The cover on the 45.
Well, even the original album with the hand drawn, the pencil sketch. Yeah, it's like, you can try to explain Sabbath and all that away, but you have that. No, you can't explain that one away. You're done.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. That's something we can talk about. We have these things that at one point were considered like the epitome of evil, and now they're kind of silly, or they're household names like King Diamond. At one point, King Diamond was like, when I first heard him, I thought it was a joke. I was like, what the fuck is it? Yeah. And then by the end of the album, I'm kind of creeped out. Like the first one I heard was Melissa. And it's an okay album, but the last song for some reason freaked me out. And I think it was because I was driving on a country road when I was listening to it. So that Melissa's still with us kind of creeped me out when I was a kid. And there was talk at one point where that was like maybe the evilest music alive. But I'll bet everybody here doesn't agree, right? Who is a fan? I
do not agree.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not a Merciful Fate fan.
Yeah.
I am both Merciful Fate and King Diamond, but I mean, it was all a shtick.
Right.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about it is that they openly, as far as the Merciful Fate, they openly had a satanic angle. I mean, the songs that they were singing about. And then on the King Diamond front, he did these horror stories, because every album is a concept album. So there's these really twisted, demented stories that are I think are put together really well. It took me a while to. Which one?
Abigail
and the Graveyard. I mean, a lot of these are really, really good. I will admit it took me a few years to get past the screeching. But once I got over that, I love this stuff. I think the guy's talented.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt. There are certain things like Man of War that I'll die on that hill, but I completely understand if nobody likes it because it's so over the top. It's so crazy. but it just scratches the right itch for me at the right time. And I'm not as big of a Scorpions fan and stuff like that. So there were certain things that were very popular when I was growing up that I was okay with, but I had this thing for like the first the EP of Queensryche before they turned into the Pink Floyd Light. They ended up they had this stuff in the beginning that was really, really good. And Kira Thungal and Celtic Frost, and, stuff like that. These were the bands that I loved because they were hard to find and they were really kind of creepy.
I'm glad you mentioned Celtic Frost, because that's a band that I always thought did a good job of really building an atmosphere. I still think
Halloween too.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing about Celtic Frost is they didn't come at it straight away. They built a mythology that was dark and related to a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't just sort of like them screaming Satan over and over again. It was the mythos that they built into their lyrics, I think, also was partially what was responsible for the success of that band. And I've seen some other bands do that too. Like there's bands like black metal bands that have evolved out of being just strictly black metal. Like I think of a band like Behemoth that has developed this sound. Their most recent couple of albums have this sort of orchestral operatic quality that it didn't have when it was black metal. And it's like, it's counterintuitive because black metal is so chaotic and so intentionally evil, but somehow it all kind of starts to sound like nails on a chalkboard to me sometimes if I'm not in the mood for it. But this stuff that has the nails on the chalkboard stuff intermingled with this sort of operatic quality that also is building a mythology, that seems darker to me even than the straight black metal stuff does that they did earlier in their careers.
There's only so far you can go with black metal before you just start repeating yourself, and you want to expand and grow. You're going to have to try incorporating other things in.
What do you think of bands like Voivod, which was kind of
Voivod, that.
Because that's not what I'd call satanic, but you can't get much darker. Voivod's just got this weird. I almost think of like Voivod being like the Cronenberg of metal. It's just like this really strange.
They were on a whole nother level from like any band ever.
There was kind of a like weird horror adjacent thing, because I think of Voivod as being a band that was kind of like a skate rock band. At least they were to my friends and I. And like Voivod was one of those bands, and so was Septic Death. Bands that just kind of talked about things that you wouldn't think of as being horrific. I remember there was a Septic Death song that was just about a mosquito landing on somebody and penetrating their skin with an infection. And then the whole rest of it was just about being infected, which is really horrifying, but not what, it's not monsters and vampires and, serial killers or whatever. So,
yeah. And there's some punk that just has that. Richard Hung Himself is this crazy song that just has this real feel to it.
You know what band had like a kind of punk band that had a lot of type horror elements was The Accused.
Yeah. Another one of those bands I think of as a skate rock band. I had this skate rock compilation that had The Accused, Voivod, Septic Death. And so that's where that comes from.
Yeah. The Accused incorporated a lot of like horror actually into their lyrics and music.
What about Fear?
Not expect.
I mean, Fear's comedic in its own way, but there was something really dangerous about Fear and Suicidal Tendencies. The very album cover of Suicidal Tendencies, everybody hanging upside down.
The very name Suicidal Tendencies.
Right. It's like Napalm Death. Suicidal Tendencies. Yeah. What band do you have a 180-degree feel about? Like for me, Metallica, when I first heard them, I was like that guy in Amadeus. Too many notes for the royal ear. I did not like them. And it took a while for me to get into them. And then they became like a huge thing for me. Is there anything like that? What's a band that you either really liked and now you can't stand, or one that you were like, nah, that's too much, and now you're like, wow, that's seminal?
Metallica.
Which way?
The other way, the opposite. I immediately liked them, and then after Master of Puppets,
done.
They all died. They all died in the bus accident.
I'll take it one step further though. After Ride the Lightning, I'm kind of done with Metallica.
See, that's
I still got to say though, Ride the Lightning is one of my favorite albums of all time. I don't care what happens or where they go. Ride the Lightning is still, I think, and I'm not even a big metal fan necessarily. Metal was never my bread and butter, but man, I love Ride the Lightning, and I like Master of Puppets too.
But I will
was like too clean compared to Ride the Lightning.
No,
it was really much more polished.
It was my gateway, though. That was the. I mentioned that I found the Return of the Living Dead stuff, but right before that, I found Master of Puppets. So it like brought me to hard music, and then that made me okay for punk rock.
Yeah. Master of Puppets was like the respectable version.
And I'm not going to blame them for it. Of course, they have to go that way, but I really don't.
You can blame them. They called everybody fucking posers. That was part of their goddamn thing. They're the biggest fucking posers there are right now.
I hope James Hetfield's not listening to this right now. I'd be so embarrassed.
They never really considered themselves a metal band. That's what Lars had said.
It's in their fucking name.
Yeah, I know. That's
metal up your ass.
Exactly what I said. I heard that and I went, "Excuse me."
Yeah, go fuck yourself, Lars. Holy shit. But
yeah, Lars is. It's a shame that he's such a good drummer because they should just make him stop talking.
Is he really?
But I would say mine goes the other way because it's funny because with the Misfits, the first Misfits album I ever heard was Evil Live, which is a mess. I mean, I love it now, but it's a mess. You know, they sound terrible. And in a lot of ways compared to how they sound on the album. And a friend of mine was like, "You're going to love this, man." And he gave it to me to listen to it. I was like, I don't know, man, that's kind of trash. And they couldn't really talk me out of it for a while. And then finally one of them was like, "It's all about old horror movies. What do you mean you don't like this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it is." And I went back and listened to it again and I started picking out the lyrics. And then I went and heard the album versions of a lot of the songs. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this instead will be one of the most important bands of my whole life. But for the first couple of months that my one friend was trying to push them down my throat, I was like, those guys suck. They can't even keep time together.
That's kind of like that too. With the first Misfits album I heard was Legacy of Brutality. And I was like, it's cool, but it's like very like 50s rock and roll. And I was like, why does everyone like this band so much? And then I heard the Earth AD Wolf's Blood. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. They're like a real crazy punk rock band. But it wasn't until I heard like a lot of the singles, like Horror Business and Bullet and stuff. I'm like, oh, so their songs are really super catchy and like violent, but sound melodic. Like, oh, okay, now I get it. And it's like the same with Sam Hain. When I first heard November Coming Fire, I was like,
oh,
cool,
wow. Yeah.
I need to be in the right state of mind to listen to it. And then I went to see, I think it was like 88 or 89. I saw Danzig's first show as Danzig right before the album came out. And they did Mother of Mercy. And like when I had hair, it blew back on my head. Like I could not believe
what happened to it.
The sound. Yeah. Well, after I heard Mother of Mercy, all my hair fell out.
It blew all your hair off and pasted it to the back wall.
It was like the heaviest thing and most powerful thing. I was like, oh yeah, I need to go back and listen to this album again. And then it was like, it all clicked.
Yeah. November Coming Fire, man. That was an album that when I first heard it, I was like, it's so scratchy. And it was like, this is so poorly done. And then it hooked me. You know, it's just one of those, it's like another level of darkness that I think is really amazing about that album, actually.
But, you know, we were such big Misfits fans, my friends and I in high school. And then I was such a big Sam Hain fan. We were all big Sam Hain fans. And so I was still in high school whenever the first Danzig album came out. And I remember we were so excited for that album. We couldn't wait. I mean, and my friend Tom finally got it. And we literally all drove over to Tom's house and sat around the record player. He dropped the needle. And so there was always kind of like a little bit of friction between metal and punk rock that I think we can all relate to if you were a member of those things. And I've still got like nothing good, particularly in my heart for like hair metal. It's not my thing. And so when that first started playing and John Christ's guitar came through and we were expecting Sam Hain to the second power and we got a little bit of butt rock in there, you got to say, I mean, it's rock and rolly. We were all like, what the fuck is this Def Leppard shit? And it took a while. I mean, the first Danzig album is a favorite album of mine. Absolutely, absolutely love that album. But it took me a little while of listening to it. And that evolved me actually into being able to listen to more sort of like classic rock type stuff and appreciate more of that stuff and not be such a stuck up snob and punk rock or nothing, you know?
Yeah.
Let me say that I'm probably one of the 4 people on the planet that actually prefer the Michael Graves Misfits.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I know.
So it's been nice being on this podcast with you. I'll be.
But if you
he's a sweet fellow.
The one thing that I didn't like about the original Misfits is they would have horror titles, but the songs were not really horror related.
Right.
The Michael Graves era, those songs are about the song titles, and I mean they did a song on The Crawling Eye, they did one on Pumpkinhead, they did Mars Attacks, and it's about the actual films.
Yeah.
Because they were like, this is what we're supposed to do. We don't know how to write, like, we're supposed to write horror songs. So let's just make movies and we'll write a song about it.
But they did it really well. And I thought those things were awesome.
Well, it's like for me, it was the Cramps, right? I think I mentioned before. When I first heard the Cramps, I was like, no. And now I really love the Cramps. But at the time when I should have been into them, I really wasn't. And I didn't get that they were big horror fans. I didn't get that they were strange, right? I mean, I got a certain part of their strange, but there's like this weird punk, there's a psychobilly, there's a kink aspect, and there's then the straight up horror thing. I just heard Goo Goo Muck and I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But now I think a lot of their stuff, so I did a whole 180 on them. But John, you mentioned something really interesting that I wanted to talk about. We know about the Misfits. The audience probably knows about the Misfits. They know about the Cramps, but how about other bands that have just kind of devoted themselves, recent bands even, that are horror centric bands?
There are a dime a dozen.
Yeah, Bloody Hammers is the one that I was thinking of.
Current favorite band of mine. Their most recent album, every single song on that album is about is horror adjacent. It's related to horror somehow, and I love that about them. Going back to what everybody was talking about earlier, I love stoner rock and doom metal because it sounds like Sabbath, and they're really taking that Sabbath, just sort of big chunky power chord and droney kind of sound and making it again. But so often the music itself is about getting high and being high and wishing I was high and being in the desert for some reason.
Right.
And none of that really impresses me all that much, but like Bloody Hammers has kind of like this doom metal thing that's very Sabbathy while also being about horror, which I think is super cool.
They do have a lot of, like the early Misfits, a lot of song titles after movies, but it's not about the movies. But I mean, I still am a big fan of theirs. But they have some really, I mean, even the song Let Sleeping Corpses Lie is about the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah. Well, what about Town That Dreaded Sundown? Isn't
that's the only song that is based on the actual movie? But they have other songs. There's one of them about something Shadows on the Wall, about a curse, a town that was cursed, and that's based on a real legend. So I mean, I love those guys. But it would be nice when you see the song titles going, oh, cool. Oh, no, it's not about that.
Yeah.
Probably one of my new favorite horror bands that I recommend to everybody is the Creeping Cruds. Love that band. They're kind of like hardish rock, punkish like, but all horror in all their lyrics. Yeah,
you told me about them. I've been listening to them. It's awesome stuff.
And obviously, if you drill into death metal much, I mean, there's just a 7 bucket loads there. But one of my favorites to talk about is the band Fulci. You guys heard Fulci?
No.
Literally every one of their albums is just a Fulci film, and there's 2 of them about zombie, and that's all that the songs are about. That's literally it. They write about Fulci movies.
that's kind of insane. Well, you have a certain amount of albums you're going to be able to put out. It reminds me of, it was a band called the Dictators. They were an old punk band, and they had a song called Fireman's Friend that was based on one episode of the Superman TV series from the 50s, a guy who would rob banks wearing a fireman's suit. You know, we just went through, it's February now. We went through Christmas, and folks like us just kind of go, as we're inundated with Christmas songs nonstop. But there's also, I mean, Halloween songs are almost as bad now, where, you know, you're going to hear the Monster Mash. You're going to hear Ghostbusters. You're going to hear all this stuff. If we had the ability to put together a mix of great songs that give you the feeling of Halloween, let's do a round robin and just see what songs would we put there.
I actually have a playlist.
There we go. So do I.
It's got 100 songs on it. So,
Oh, nice. What would you put on there? What would be there?
So a lot of rockabilly, not rockabilly, psychobilly stuff. Like I don't know if you ever heard this band, the Spectres.
No.
They're a psychobilly band, and all their stuff is very it's all very horror centric, and it's really catchy songs. The Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black.
What a great title!
That's the name of the band. The Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black, and she has a song called "I Believe in Halloween."
Yeah, that's Kembra Phaler's band, the one that was in all the Nick Zedd movies.
Oh, no shit. I never heard of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like just kind of straight up kind of rock kind of stuff.
But she always wears this crazy kabuki makeup and is naked except for like a G-string and painted blue. If you ever see that, they look
as I remember
crazy.
Karen Black. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the Airport 75 Karen Black
band called Famous Monsters. The bassist from White Zombie, Sean, however you say her name, Zolt, or her last, I forget her last name, how you say it, but she was in a band with three girls, and they were called Famous Monsters, and it was a lot of mostly instrumental kind of 50s kind of rock sound, but some of their songs had lyrics and stuff like that, or it would just be simple things where they would just have a chorus where they just scream out like monster names or something like that. The Dead Elvi, Kevin from Chiller Theater's band, their first album, a lot of horror type songs and stuff like that. I have a song strictly about John Agar and all the movies he's in.
That's awesome.
Another one I like a lot. This is a made up band that was in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie at all, but at the end of the movie that they're in the barn at the party, and there's a band on stage, and the name of the band, it's a made up band for the movie, but the name of the band is called Captain Clegg and the Night Creatures. And
it's
a great name.
It's a great band, and they put out an album of all just horror songs, and it's like really a great album for just like kind of Halloween horror songs.
It's kind of amazing that it's taken this long to even bring up Zombie or White Zombie or anything like that, because there's such weirdness in his songs, and it's always
a lot of like White Zombie and Rob Zombie stuff is like that. Of course, John Zachary had some stuff. Soupy Sales, My Baby's Got a Crush on Frankenstein.
A lot of ways, Zachary kicked off all that novelty stuff we were talking about earlier. He had an early one in 58. That's right. Yeah, Dinner with Drag.
Yeah, Dinner with Drag. There's also back in the day. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the people who put it out. But there were those novelty songs. I think it was from the 50s, The Flying Saucer by Buchanan and Goodman. That's it. So what they did is they would have like a news report. They'd start a song. It'd be an instrumental, and it would stop and go, "Hello, this is whatever news agency. Well, we've just been told that there's a visitor from another planet." And they go, "What is your name?" And they play some song. They just play like a part of it, and that was supposed to be the person's voice. They did another one on Jaws called Mr. Jaws back in the 70s.
Yeah,
Dickie Goodman.
Yeah, Dickie Goodman.
Yeah,
Goodman and Buchanan, I think, was the band. Yeah, Dickie Goodman. So there were all those kind of things that I think were kind of interesting too. Once again, going to that thing of almost like with Kiss and Alice Cooper, where there's a scariness. And how do we deal with scariness? We make it funny. We add some humor to it, and it allows us to be able to have it more palatable for everybody.
One band, for sure, or I shouldn't say band, but performer, and he's on the Return of the Living Dead soundtrack. Worth mentioning, Rocky Erickson.
That's what I was just waiting to say. Rocky Erickson. This morning I was listening to Gremlins Have Pictures, and man, I can't tell you how much I love Rocky Erickson. Getting to see Rocky Erickson in concert was almost as good as meeting Jesus, I think. Like it was that level of like, I can't believe.
When did that happen?
Oh, I'll tell you about it another time. Like seriously, me and some guys that I knew, like after the Rocky Erickson show, just stood in the bathroom together. We were all standing in a circle in the bathroom, and we just couldn't talk. We were like, we were standing in a circle in the bathroom. Infer from that what you will. But we were just like, we just kept saying to each other, I cannot believe I just saw Rocky Erickson. And my favorite Rocky Erickson song is definitely one that I would put on the list, which is Cold Night for Alligators. You guys know it's Cold Night for Alligators? It's a song about alligator people, weregators, I guess. And I can't
Sounds
think of anything
awesome.
better because he makes up his own monster and then sings a very serious song about it, you know. That one's on Gremlins Have Pictures, my favorite version of it. But yeah, anything from the evil one goes on my playlist. Yeah. There's one album that I really like. It's a various artists album, but it's called This Is Horror Punk. And I'd put almost anything from that thing on there. There's a band called the Monsters that's from Sweden that I really like. Their lead singer is a guy named Reverend Beatman, and he does a more sort of traditional Americana thing with his solo career. But the Monsters are almost like, again, they're almost like the Cramps in that they're like that novelty music, but it's taken a step further. And there's a bunch of bands on there, one's Ghoul Town, and I got to give those guys props just because I feel like a lot of us are people who have taken our horror fandom and done something with it. And I feel like Ghoul Town is a band that's an exemplar of taking your horror fandom and being like, we're going to make a band that's really all about being horror fans. And I mean, there's a lot of those, but I just happen to see Ghoul Town a lot.
Rob Zombie put out that album, Halloween Hootenanny. That has a lot. It's a compilation with a lot of good bands on it.
Although Black Sabbath, for the most part, at least during the Aussie years, you wouldn't say really had a satanic thing. They did have one song that really messed with me. Ian Gillan sings it, "Disturbing the Priest" off of Born Again. That fucking song. Whew, that's one I put right up there.
That's one of the albums that a lot of people don't admit they like, but Gillan, it worked for a very short time. I don't think it would have lasted. Obviously, it didn't.
Right.
But his voice, I think he had probably one of the best voices for Sabbath at that time.
Yeah.
As far as bringing out the evil and the sound, and his fucking laugh is just.
Oh, yeah. His laugh. And they're playing that dissonant chord. And he's keep looking at the eyes. And you're like, holy shit. Some crazy stuff.
I would say one of the newer bands, granted not newer, but there's I think they're German, called Powerwolf, where the singer's an ex-opera singer. So it's power metal, but they make fun of the church, which is the Catholic Church, which is awesome. But they have a lot of horror related titles like We Drink Your Blood, and where they'll do a lot of songs about werewolves. They have one song that's in Latin, and I can't remember the freaking name, but it basically is translated to holy balls. And it's a fucking riot. And then years ago, for a short time, I was a huge fan of Lordi, which is a gore sort of ripoff.
Yeah.
And it's one of those bands that I loved, and they won the Eurovision, basically like American Idol over in Europe. And after that, everything they put out, I thought was terrible. But everything before that was great. They did a song called Blood Red Sandman when they did a video of it, and they basically ripped off Evil Dead. But it's done really well, and it's pretty cool. It's hard to get. I mean, a lot of the horror stuff, it's hard to bring in a really good story and yet make it a good song.
Yeah.
And I think that's really tough to do.
Yeah. And that's like the guilty pleasure that I have after hearing it a million times. I still stop if I hear Don't Fear the Reaper. There's something about that song that just really just essentially sounds like, I won't say Halloween, but fear. And it might be that it was in the Halloween soundtrack, right? It was in the movie, and maybe that somehow got caught deep in me. But that's one that's my guilty pleasure. You know, I know more cowbell makes it silly. Fast forward
that song.
Can't stand it, huh?
Nope.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh God, that's like a horror related.
Yeah,
song?
Something that you go, well, you know, I like it anyway.
I guess Monster Mash.
I thought it might be
overplayed, but it doesn't bother me really.
The backbeat's so good, right?
You know, we mentioned, or I mentioned earlier, industrial music, and if we're going to go back to this idea of the horror playlist, there's a bunch of stuff, especially like the Wax Trax stuff at the like mid 80s. So I'm thinking of like My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult's first couple of albums. There's so much horror sounding stuff on there, or the Revolting Cocks, the Beer Steers and Queers album, which I don't think of as being sort of horror-y, but there's a song on there called In the Neck that's just basically about being a serial killer. And that sort of subject matter, or being a devil worshiper or whatever, it crops up in a lot of industrial music too. So I would throw a lot of that stuff on my Halloween playlist. In fact, I would say around Halloween, that's usually the music I'm listening to.
I mean, Ogre and Kevin Keys and stuff like that, they were all big horror fans, right? I mean, I remember early Skinny Puppy videos were just clips of Argento films.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the one, James, I can't remember the name of the band now. Jamestown Massacre, was that it?
Brian Jonestown Massacre?
Yeah, Brian Jonestown Massacre. Not what I would call, really scary music. There's something about it that felt dangerous. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's almost like when I would listen to that, I always felt like the drummer, like the stool he was on was breaking, like falling backwards. And like everybody was just barely holding on to their equipment and they were about ready to fight. And it was just something that sometimes might be reputation, might be visual image, but it somehow gets stuck in the music, like Trent Reznor, the video for Closer, right? As a Closer, that even gets kind of brought into Seven in the beginning of Seven. There's just something so weirdly demonic about that video that works so well that song now has a certain darkness to it.
Yeah, because I think you talk about what music's scary, and I think that you can draw a line between the music itself being scary and then the experience of seeing the music live being scary, which are two different animals, I think about going to see the Murder Junkies, and this is after Gigi Allen was dead, but just the Murder Junkies was still pretty scary. Like people came out of the woodwork for that I was like, dude, you need to get a shot or something. There is something wrong with some of these people.
Yeah. Well, that's like Slayer. I mean, when I first saw Slayer, I've seen them a couple times over the years, but I remember that was the first time I ever saw a mosh pit that I was scared of. Like I saw it at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, which is a huge venue. And half of the Cow Palace, the first band was Megadeth or somebody else, and then Megadeth. And they had a decent sized mosh pit. When Slayer started, half of the arena was a mosh pit. And you could feel the rumble. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, do I dare go into this fucking pit? And all of a sudden I look in the center and pants fly in the air. I'm like, they're taking people's pants. I'm not fucking getting in that goddamn thing. There was just a reputation about Slayer that was I still love. It was one of the metal documentaries. They talked to Rob Zombie and he goes, Slayer's is one of those bands. Nobody ever said, yeah, I was into Slayer for a summer. That's like, you're into Slayer. It's just that. And I felt that when I would go see them, there was a definite energy to Slayer that was aggro in the parking lot, in the venue. And then when you got into the mosh pit, by the end, you're like hugging people. You're like, that was fucking awesome. And I need vaccinations. This is
and medical attention.
Yeah, medical attention. Is there any orthodontist here?
Yeah, man. I remember you were talking about that, and it made me think of the second Lollapalooza Ministry headline, and I saw that at the Riverport, what used to be the Riverport Amphitheater in St. Louis, and that created the biggest single pit I've ever seen. Like it was a pit that was the size of most venues, and instead of pants flying up, I just saw people fly out, and you would literally see people get ejected from the pit, and then people were walking past you with like blood, like it looked like blood was just like, I don't even know how to describe it, like it had been painted on. And I saw one person walk past me with a big grin on his face, and between every one of his teeth was blood, like gushing out. But wow. I was like, there's some kind of something happening over there, because I've been in a lot of pits in my life. And I was like, I'm not going in that pit, though. That pit looks dangerous.
The worst one I was ever in was the Ramones, weirdly enough. I don't think of the Ramones as a violent band, but holy shit, were their fans violent. I ended up having my knee knocked out, and I'm in the back. And I look around, it's like Nash. It's like people waiting here. And I'm like, who's left? This is a small venue. But it was like they really brought in, people just got angry, and that was at that point in the mid 80s to late 80s where metal and punk were like overlapping at shows. And that's when it got violent. Like you'd have the punk would bump into the metalhead, and the metalhead would punch the guy in the face. The next thing you know, there'd be like this fracas. And so it was a really, really strange show, even though they were a lot of fun. They were hilarious, but the fans were.
I mean, you may not think of the Ramones as like a horror band, but I mean, they do have the song Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Pet Cemetery.
Pet Cemetery. Pet Cemetery. Johnny Ramone was a huge exploitation fan.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. And horror.
I saw Godflesh and Skinny Puppy together once. And beforehand, talking about those odd bedfellows, there was just some dude in front of me and where the pit was about to be as soon as the first band came out. And he just would not stop screaming, Ozzy, for some reason. I was like, what is this guy doing here, you think? And I was like, the best part is once the meat grinder starts, I'm pretty sure he's going to get tore up. That was the craziest pit I've ever been in, too, by the way. When Godflesh started, if you guys, I don't know how well you know Godflesh, but they're just very kind of
great,
droney.
I love the first two Godflesh albums.
Yeah. And so when they started playing, it's just these two like skinny white dudes walk out in front of a curtain with white T-shirts on with guitars strapped on. And then you hear this like click track, clack, clack. And they both hit their guitars with these giant notes, 4 giant notes. And the whole pit went boom, 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 and compressed like in 4 beats compressed. And then all of a sudden I was being lifted 1.5 feet off the ground as the, the crowd was bouncing up and down in unison. It was one of the weirder experiences of my life, just like, well, I'm not getting out of this pit, even if I wanted to.
Suicidal tendencies. I got into the wall of death a couple times in the suicidal tendencies. And you're just like, well, I'm fucking here now. Let's just do this fucking thing. And it's like, holy shit. That is such a weirdly terrifying thing. When you're just watching your kind of stirring and stirring and stirring, you're waiting for him to just scream, and you're watching the guy across from you, maybe 10 yards away from each other, like that, and just boom. Oh my God. It's just, I can't believe I did that shit, but I did do that shit.
I'm too old now. Like the idea of all those people sweating on me and stuff and just touching me that much, I'm like, I don't think so.
After COVID, man, I think of all these things that I used to do, like wanting to be at the front and getting covered in sweating, like even birthday cakes. Get the elderly and the children together, and we're going to breathe on cake, and then we're going to eat it. I was like,
like going to Gore just seems like you're just gonna, and I know it's all pretend, but the idea that you're just gonna take a face full of bodily fluid at this point is like, I'll pass.
Yeah.
Now when I buy concert tickets, I'm like, are there seats available?
Right. Exactly. Oh, it's general admission. Fuck that noise.
Yeah. What an unnatural feeling. I remember seeing the day after I turned 21, I saw Helmet and the Rollins band together. Oh, wow. And I remember having to sit down for that and being 21 years old and like, Helmet sure is nice today, huh?
That's funny. I remember seeing, it was at a venue in California here. I think it was the Bill Graham thing. Anyway, they had it where you had to sit. They had seated stuff, and there was the lawn up above, and it was an all-day metal fest. And Motorhead comes on, and Lemmy's like, we're not doing anything until people get up. And people like, and you can see like the ushers are like, sit down. But people got up and they started jumping around and everything. And it's like, but it's seats, and you're just jumping in front of a seat. But that was kind of how it was, in arena rock when I went to see Defenders of the Faith. For Judas Priest, I mean, it was 11,000 to 14,000 people in the Brennan Byrne Arena. You're up in the seats, and in the seats, it's just you're smacking each other as hard as you can, but you're not really able to do anything more than that. Yeah.
When I seen them on that tour, I was in straight back on the upper level, front row. So literally sitting down, going, "Man, this is awesome!" Oh, golf clap. Like I don't have to stand up. I can see perfectly straight into the stage. Just sat down and watched the show. Fuck all that other stuff, man.
It was like 15 years ago, but I had tickets. I got food poisoning, but I had tickets to go see Tool. And I didn't go. My girlfriend at the time went, and the seats were behind the band.
Right.
Like you looked at their back and you were also sitting 5,000 feet away from them watching them. And so I saw Tool at Lollapalooza this third year they did it on the side stage. Like nobody knew who they were yet. It was like me and 100 people. And I was wow. Well, I could go see them again and sit in orbit around them somewhere. Or I could just have that experience and never go see them again, I guess. I feel like at some point, like, I'm not really interested. If you can't get personal with the music and get down to it, I'm not super excited about it.
I saw Pearl Jam behind the stage once, and at first I was pretty bummed about it. We were fairly close to stage, but it was still right behind them. But it was an interesting perspective because, you know, they're a pretty stripped down band. They don't have like any kind of stage show or anything like that. So you could see, so you pretty much saw you saw what they were seeing. And it was a really interesting perspective that you're looking at the crowd that they're looking at playing the music. And it's almost like you're on stage with them to experience it. It actually turned out to be a really amazing show. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
I was going to say, I would not have pegged you a Pearl Jam fan.
Dude, I have such a Pearl Jam story. This probably isn't the podcast, so I have to tell you another time.
That's fine.
Such a Pearl Jam story to tell you about my discovery of that band.
Yeah, I had my moment of glory seeing Dio at the Philadelphia Spectrum for the last in line? I think it was Last in Line. I was trying to remember if it was the one before or Last in Line. I think it was
Twisted Sister open for him?
Yeah, Twisted Sister open.
That was Last in Line.
Yeah, and Twisted Sister opened for just about everybody that year in Philadelphia. They were like the house.
And oddly enough, Dee Schneider kept getting in fights at the same point in his concert.
Right.
And dive off the stage. It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah, and sometimes they'd wear the jeans jackets, and sometimes they'd wear the funny stuff. And
the funny stuff.
Yeah. But it was
Gee, what are we wearing tonight? Jeans, or are we wearing the funny stuff?
Exactly. He's like, the clown makeup, sir. But they recorded the live version of the Dio concert for VHS at that show. So we saw signs that we were going to be in it and everything. And so I flew all the way up as close as I could, and I got punched in the face by the roadies during Twisted Sister. I didn't do shit, but they're just like, get back. Like, what the fuck? So it happened a couple times, and then they come out and they do stand up and shout. So they have these pots, the flame pots, and they must have just put some extra shit in there because that thing went off. Stand up and shout, and everybody goes, "Wah!" And it was just a wall of fire. I could feel my eyebrow. I could feel everything. Everybody's like cheering, and all of a sudden everybody went, "Ooh!" and went backwards. And it was like, but it was one of those things where you're just watching somebody. You know, Dio was a name, but it was kind of like all of a sudden he went from here to here. It was like you saw somebody just grabbing on to the reins and going, "We're going to take this show really high." And it was one of the greatest experiences that I had in a concert, even though it was really, you know, I got punched, which wasn't great, and semi-burnt. And, you know, when you're in the Philadelphia Spectrum and you're in the front, you are in a crushing hazard. It was just like, there were a couple of times where I had to like raise up on people's shoulders just to breathe because it was just so insane. And to think that was how it was. But at the same point, it's kind of like talking about metal and punk and all this. It's like an exorcism. You know, I started talking about how horror and music itself were these releases for me, and also how I found my tribe, how I found people that I related to. And I guess that's a great place for us to stop. You know, we talked a little bit about our Halloween stuff. Is there anything like the song that you felt saved your soul, that you said, all right, this is the one? Is there any song that just really talks to you even to this day, that when you first heard it, you're like, here we go. This is me.
A million.
Yeah.
Am I evil from Diamond
Head? Yep. I still have that one. Yep.
I mean, I look at my love of music and horror is very parallel with each other in its discovery, where it's like at first I was like very eager, like gobbling up everything when I first got into like metal and stuff like that. And the same with horror, you're kind of like soaking in like a sponge everything you can before you really know what you like, what you don't like. And then when I got into Venom and eventually found like the whole metal underground, which led me into the whole punk underground, it's like at the same time discovering Argento and Fulci, and you getting into the gore. And then it's like, well, now you're just looking for more extreme music and Napalm Death and Carcass. And then I'm just looking for like the most extreme gory films that there is. And then you kind of plateau like around 92. I was like, yeah, I don't like any of this new music coming out. I don't like anything I'm hearing. It all sounds the same, and it's just all repetitive. And I retreated back into just listening to what I was listening to, like early 80s hardcore and metal and stuff like that. And it's the same with movies. People complain about not a lot of good movies made anymore. And, they're, for the most part, some good, a lot bad. So you're kind of stuck. Like now I retracted back to like the 70s, because that's what I love for like movies the most. So it's just a very parallel journey, I think, for music and movies.
The other connection there is the same with movies. Is if you heard a band or discovered a band that you loved, the first thing you did was to try to share it.
Yep.
Same with a movie. You stumbled across a movie that blew you away, you got to show somebody else.
Yep, absolutely.
Which is the best part of both.
Yeah.
You got to give it away. Yeah, that's
the lucky thing about all this stuff. I feel like it's like, kind of like Damien, you said, I'll go on these periods where it's like, I don't like anything that I'm listening to. I don't like anything I'm listening to. I'm afraid I'm going to be stuck in this rut. And then some new band will show up, and that'll kick off discovering 10 more somehow. I'll learn about a whole subgenre I'd never heard of, or, kind of like I mentioned before, I didn't start listening to death metal really until about 3 years ago. Just wasn't my thing, but I found so much death metal that really resonates with me now. And it's like, well, I could be upset that I didn't find it till now, or I could just be happy that I found a thing that used to not resonate with me that now really, really does.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with finding like a director or something of just, movies that that have been around forever. You just never really delved into. And then once you did, you kind of fell in love with it.
And that's what's really great about both of these things too. I mean, if I had another 50 years, I'm still not going to see all the horror films that there are out there that I've missed, like obscure British horror films that I don't know anything about. And whenever I can sit there and say, maybe the movies aren't great now, then I find Indonesian horror films. I start seeing stuff out of South Korea that blows my mind. And all of a sudden I have a renewed interest. And I think that, we didn't even talk about outside of America, mostly metal bands, Sepultura and stuff like that.
I think about like how many underground bands there are. Like when I was in the early late 80s, early 90s, I was really into the underground death metal scene, and it was all about like getting demos from bands. I was a big tape trader and stuff. So you don't find many bands you like nowadays anymore, but like think about all the underground bands that are probably great that you just don't know about because you're not really involved in that scene so much. And there's probably a million amazing bands that you just haven't heard.
Yeah. And
like you're saying, like Indonesian movies, there's a whole underground of probably great horror that you just got to really dig and search for, but it's there.
Just when I think I know all the bargain basement guys, then John on his website puts something out of somebody I've never heard of before, or a movie that I never even knew existed. And I'm like, really? There are that many guys that I still don't know anything about. So it kind of blows my mind. I think there's always room. I always try to think that I'm the one who has to be the immigrant now. Right. The times have changed, all of that stuff. I need to be open. I need to be able to walk in and see this stuff. And it means a lot of times, I mean, if we're being honest, there were a lot of movies I watched in the 80s that when I would get like a stack of videotapes, and there'd be 4 that were good and there'd be 20 that really sucked. It'd be just like when I used to get records in the brown paper bag for $5. Well, what's in it? Buy it for $5 and find out. And half of them are polka albums, but then there's like 2 or 3. You're like, wow, look at this. And these are bands I'd never listened to. So I need to be open to that. And I need to be, raring to go when something comes. And I'm really grateful for you folks, because you will always bring something to the table that's worth knowing about. And as much as all of us know together, there's still stuff that we don't know, that there's a fan out there that can let us know. And so with that, I do want to say thanks so much for being on the show. Tell everyone a little bit more about your great podcast, Discover the Horror.
It's bi-weekly. We put out a new episode every 2 weeks, different theme.
What you just said, Scott, is exactly it. It's like there's a couple of things that I find are pet peeves of mine when people start talking about films. One is when they can't talk about anything other than this movie's great or this movie sucks. And one of the things that we do is go in depth into what the movie's content is. And I think that's an important thing. And then also another thing I can't wrap my head around is when people go, should I get a Shudder subscription? And somebody goes, nope, everything on there is stupid.
Right.
And kind of what you were talking about earlier, there's so much international horror. There's so much horror. There's so much horror out there. There's no way that Shudder doesn't have a movie that any one of us needs to see. And so the idea for me for doing the podcast is just maybe we'll happen to either give people some new way to look at something so that they'll be able to appreciate it, or we'll just turn them on to stuff they've never heard of before.
And Shudder's got shit on there now that's like, wow, that used to be really controversial. I'm stunned that you actually have that on there. So I'm pleased with them. Tubi's another great one, as everybody knows, find some good obscure old stuff. I'm really pleased with that. How about what else are you folks up to outside of the podcast? Where can listeners follow each of you? What's coming up in the future?
I'm waiting for convention season to start. So we'll be hitting the road. Until then, you can find me at kidleyscript.com or the podcast, discoverthehorror.com.
Yeah, same. There's an Instagram for Discover the Horror. It's just Discover the Horror at Discover the Horror. And I'm on Letterboxd, so just Aaron Abishan, all one word. I'm kind of off of a lot of other social media right now. But I've got some work coming out in a few books this year, mostly through We Belong Dead and their press. So that's some cool stuff to look out for if you want to read my dumb thoughts about movies.
How about Webster University? You'd mentioned that you were hoping people to learn a little bit more. What are you doing there?
Well, we have a film, television, and video production program and a film studies program. And one of the things I'd like people to know about them is that they are places that are very genre friendly. I teach a class in horror. We teach one of our instructors is a horror filmmaker. So he teaches a class on horror production. We have science fiction classes. We're working on a comic book certificate, maybe even a comic book degree. So what I want people to know about Webster University is that we're in some ways a regional school that caters to everything, but we're certainly a place that has classes and is really putting our shoulder into, if you live in a town where somebody thinks you're a nerd for the stuff that you're into, you're going to find a home when you come to Webster.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And for those that are listening out there, as I mentioned before, music, like horror, it's very subjective. What you like and you don't like, it's pretty intensely personal. And you probably heard that through us today, and it's different for each person. But even though it's subjective and it's personal, music has an amazing ability to bring us together, just like horror does. And I hope that in listening to this conversation, you've been inspired to continue this conversation with your own friends or make new ones through the power of music or through the power of horror films. So I want to thank my guests one more time, but I also want to thank you out there in podcast land. Thank you so much for listening to Hellbent for Horror, where I am here to remind you that you used to love horror films and you secretly still do. Just remember to stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.